Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back with you guys and girls for another episode of what is our Let's Talk Arsenal episode. This one is different. We're breaking away from the usual Arsenal news and transfers and matches and demolishing of West Ham, which has been very enjoyable, to a topic which is, I hope, and can be in a way enjoyable to talk about and to kind of bring more to the light, but also to talk more seriously about a topic that seems to worryingly crop up quite often in my comment sections and chat boxes as I do my shows. Whenever I reference the Arsenal women's team, it happens quite a bit. And just in general, when we have female guests sometimes on the show as well. It's a topic that I've wanted to talk about for a while. And today I thought was a good opportunity to do that. And I'm very happy to be joined by two fantastic people. But let's let the credits roll and get straight into things. I'm very happy to be joined this evening by Laura and Sophie. How are you girls doing? You good, Joelle?
Yeah, good, thanks.
I made the mistake of doing a thing I never do, which is introduce two people at the exact same time, so you both waiting for the other one to reply.
Yeah, you talk first.
It just shows you how respectful we all are, that we're always waiting. I do it as well. But it's great to have you both on. Firstly, Laura, I obviously joined forces with you on FK's Latte Firm channel not so recently. We both have the displeasure of having to know that man too in depth. But no, he's a fantastic bloke. And I thought what the best way to do is probably start, because this is both of your debuts on TGT, to kind of give listeners, I guess, an opportunity to know how you fell into the world of Arsenal and where it stems from. So take it away, Laura.
Sure. So I grew up in a town just outside of London, and the reason that I'm an Arsenal fan is because the legendary Nigel Winterburn's kids went to my school, and when I was probably 7 or 8, maybe slightly older, Joe, who is Nigel's youngest son, was in my class, and all the girls fancied him. He was the one that all the girls fancied. And when I was in year 6, I finally plucked up the courage to ask him to be my boyfriend over MSN. And
MSN. Those were the days.
those are the days. I don't actually think we ever physically saw each other during that time, but a 2-week whirlwind romance. Unfortunately, he dumped me after about 2 weeks. But from being around, Nigel and everything, that's how I became an Arsenal fan, basically. So, romance, get my heart broken, but here I am 20 years later.
Yes, Arsenal can also break your heart. It's very fair to say as well. So it's a lifelong contract we enter to, that's for sure. Sophie, also making your debut on the show. Welcome. Tell people, of course, where they can find you, because now you've got your own channel as well that you do, which I've featured on. I was very happy to join you over there, and also your story into how you fell into the club.
Thank you so much for having me on, first of all. But yeah, you can find me on my YouTube, which is Gooner Gossip TV, or my Twitter, TV_Gooner, which a lot of people probably know me from. But my story of Arsenal, it's quite I think it's quite different to a lot of people, because a lot of people support the team, their dad supports usually. But for me, living, up north, the teams you kind of watch were Liverpool, United, the typical teams down here, and none of them really interested me, really. And well, my family do support Liverpool, unfortunately. But Liverpool Arsenal played one day, I think it was around 2015, and I just love the club. I think if I have to put it down to something, I'd probably put it down to Wenger and Alexis Sanchez. I love the players that we had then, and I just felt like the club was like my home. There's a saying, you don't support the club for the trophies, you support it because of it's a place where you belong. So I just always felt like Arsenal was home to me, and I just thought it was the right club for me. So that's basically my story.
Yeah, it's great. No, I think it's great hearing about the stories. I love the fact that players like Alexis Sanchez are now being brought up by a generation below mine. I think regards kind of inspiration as well. So that's, a shame he went to Manchester United, but certainly an inspirational player all the same, and scored a couple of times indeed against them also. But we move swiftly kind of toward the focus of today's show. The title of today's show is Enough is Enough, because And as I said at the start, I've wanted to do this show for a while because I am frankly just sick and tired and bored of seeing the same repetitive comments come up, especially as I know the cliche phrase is it's 2024, or last year we say it's now 2023, and we're still seeing these types of comments. But so often, if I mention the Arsenal women's team on our morning news show, I'll get comments in the comment section of the chat box saying you should do a separate show about the women's team because I'm not interested. Or if I have a female guest on, sometimes people make comments about how they look or just the fact that it's a woman talking about football. And I am just so bored of that. And I thought, rather than just ignoring it, because that's often something I think you're told as a kid. Like if you're getting bullied at school, sometimes say if you ignore it, a bully will go away. But the reality is that doesn't work. And I think actually addressing the problem head on is the best way of usually tackling these things. And I think talking about these topics are the best ways of trying to bring it into the light more. So I guess the best place to start is with examples so people know that this is real. So the girls, I asked you guys before, obviously, if you were comfortable doing this, and you are, about talking about your own negative experiences with disparaging comments or sexism in the world of football, specifically maybe Arsenal as well. But Laura, starting with you, how real has it been being a female voice in, a very social online world of Arsenal?
It's very up and down, I think. One thing I will say is that the majority of my experiences at Arsenal have been positive. I find it to be a very, very welcoming environment, and I think Arsenal have a really rich history of embracing minorities. I think the first team to field 9 black players in 2002. And so when I'm physically at the game, and obviously I can only speak from my own experience here, I feel very, very comfortable, which is counter to obviously what we've seen kind of on Twitter today. My main frustration is how bold people are on Twitter, and it is always the same. It is always someone without a profile picture. It's with someone, with a hidden identity, saying things that they would just never, ever say to you in person. And that I think is so troubling about social media is 20, 25 years ago, you could talk about someone behind their back and they'll never know about it. But social media basically emboldens us to tell people that we don't like them. And it's a really strange, anywhere else in your life, if you don't like something, you just get on with your life. On social media, we seem to make it a thing of, I don't like that and I want everyone to know about it. And that extends to you don't like me. I think the difference, often, you just said it there, Tom, the difference with being a woman is that what you don't like about me becomes completely intrinsically linked to me being a woman. It's not that you don't agree with my footballing opinion, it's that you don't agree with it and I'm wrong because I'm a woman. And the most disparaging thing about being a woman on social media is that you can ignore, the sort of really, really angry men. But what's disappointing is seeing how much support there is often in the comments. I don't want to give him airtime, but the thing that disappoints me most about Joe Barton is how many people reply to his tweet saying, "I agree, mate. You're speaking the right thing." And these could be people who are sit next to a stadium and you don't know. And so it's really just a case for me. I wish I could sit here and say to you, yeah, it doesn't bother me. Yeah, if I get a nasty comment, I just delete it. But I can probably recall to you every single nasty thing anyone has ever said to me. Genuinely does leave. And there was I think there was a campaign a couple of years ago that, online abuse leaves a scar. And Sophie was saying, but for me, I can probably recall word for word everything horrible anyone has ever said to me. And that's not me being, not thick-skinned. It's just, you shouldn't expect it. It shouldn't be normal, but you just kind of, okay, that's now seared on my memory. And it's just kind of part and parcel really of being online and trying to have a bit of a presence, basically.
Yeah, it's horrible hearing those stories. I'm sorry that you've gone through that. I use the terminology of being as a guy in the space. There is a level of privilege. I'm never gonna experience the things that both of you have experienced. I get abuse, sure, but it's never related to the fact I'm a guy in this space. And I never have to worry about leaving a tweet or a reply or putting up a YouTube video and I'm going to get attacked for something that is utterly out of control and was the luck of birth. It's never, ever going to be something that I'm targeted for. So today is a listening episode for me, and listening to both of your experiences and learning more about it. And I hope the listeners are doing the same. So, Sophie, moving to you as well, if you want to, and be as open as you like about it, your own experiences in this space.
Yeah, I think, well, I used to, at school love to play football, and there were a lot of boys playing football. So I always felt a bit like, not awkward, but you feel like, is it right to get involved because there's not many girls playing? And I remember like just thinking like, why not? I should be playing like if I want to. And I just remember like some of the boys would make me feel a bit like I shouldn't be there. And I just remember thinking like, should this be like, is this normal, or am I just overthinking it? So I do think regarding playing football, I know there's the social media side, which I'll come to in a minute, but
Yeah.
I think regarding that sense, I think it's always been difficult because yeah, it's really hard because when I was at school, no one really said, "Do you want to play?" Like, no one would make me feel involved, even though I always loved football. So it was kind of really hard to push myself out there and be able to do that. And I have also played with girls as well, which has been a lot more comfortable. Like as a woman, it's nice. But I think it's just really important to kind of make everyone feel included in it, because I know now in nowadays, what you see with the Lionesses as well, women's football has grown a lot, and we are seeing more women play football, which I think is amazing. But I think it is hard, really, when there's tons of boys playing. You kind of feel like you're wrong to want to play with them because it's a bit difficult. But growing up, I always used to play with my brother and my cousin, and it was always like a normal thing to do. It wasn't like because I'm a girl I shouldn't be playing, and I think I'll always remember that, really. But I think with social media, it's obviously a difficult one because, as you mentioned, Tom, with YouTube, for me, I've actually been quite lucky because I always mostly get really nice comments when I do YouTube, but I obviously have had a few of, nasty ones about getting back to the kitchen, and I do kind of laugh at them because I think it's ridiculous. But then the other side is like, what goes through their mind to say that? Like, if you don't agree with what I say, or if you don't like it, then that's fair enough. You can leave me a comment and say something, but it's kind of sad it has to go to the sexism side of it, rather than just giving you criticism about something. It's a shame that it does happen, and we do obviously see it a lot online with women maybe not feeling safe at games, as Laura mentioned before. And it's a shame because there will be women that probably, when they go to games, they probably feel like they can't be alone, and everyone, should feel safe about going to a game. And it's obviously, I feel like we're doing good, but there's still a lot of work to do, I feel, because if the Lionesses as an example for women's football, we're seeing a lot more interest in it, but we're also seeing, like Laura mentioned with the Joey Barton stuff, how people have kind of jumped on the bandwagon of the hate situation. And it is sad to see, especially with social media. It's quite toxic at times. I know it's a lovely place to be, but I think we've still got a long way to go, really.
No, we absolutely do, and it's sad. I think that in some ways, I think social media actually has gone backwards in the last couple of years. Whether that's because of the change of now who owns a space like Twitter, and how that's opened up more opportunities for sadly kind of anonymity and abuse to be so unpoliced in some ways. We will talk about what we think the solutions are, if we can even come up with them, because it is a really difficult thing to trying to find the solutions to. But I think maybe education is at the core of that, and that's why I wanted to do the show today. But there was something on social media today, Laura, obviously, that we're aware of that happened. I'm not going to mention the individual who was involved in particular because I've not reached out to them, so I don't think it'd be the respectful thing to do if they wouldn't want to be mentioned. But in general terms, what we've seen is somebody targeted by having their image taken at the Emirates, and then posted online with a rather crude tag in the tweet as well. As someone who obviously goes to games, like plenty of other women as well, is that how? I mean, I'm not going to level the question a certain way. How does it make you feel, like seeing that sort of thing?
Yeah, there's a number of things that are disappointing about it. For me, it's the taking of the photo in itself is just not okay. Just go and say hello, just be a normal human being. It's more the fact that you're so detached from reality that you thought posting that on Twitter was the right thing to do. And I'm shocked at what that individual thought was going to happen. Like, what did you think was going to happen there? That people would, write underneath it, oh, great photos. It's just, it's terrifying to me that the lack of kind of awareness that what you've done in the first instance is wrong, and then to go as far as sharing what you've done on a social public platform it is just really. And also, football is, when the good side of football really should be a leveler for everyone, that we are a community of people with one thing in common. We can be as different as we want, and we have a international fan base, and we are in the stadium. We are ultimately supporting the same team and are on the same team. That is not the right environment. That should never be the environment for you to make someone else feel unsafe. And it's really disappointing to me, especially as for a lot of people and myself as well, being at Arsenal is being at home, is being in my happy place. And I think to have someone violate that is really shocking. And it would certainly make me think twice about attending by myself. I go and sit next to my brother, but I always go to the game, by myself, and walk to the stadium by myself. And I feel comfortable, but it certainly made me really think about actually who is in the stadium, which is, again, as I said, it's really sad. Arsenal is a for me and lots of people, it's a sacred place. That is your happy place. It's where you experience things with other people that you don't get to experience, and it really puts a sad mark on the next time this person goes to the Emirates, basically.
Yeah. The next question I was going to ask, does it make you feel any less? So I know you opened the last point by saying you've always felt, that Arsenal do a great job with everything they're doing, but does it in any way make you feel less safe, or like that you feel like you need to be more aware of your surroundings, perhaps, when at games?
It does and it doesn't. Ultimately, there is an awareness that women carry all the time that I think is quite hard to explain to men, and that's not because we think all men are bad. That's the one thing I'm going to get across. I'm not walking around fearful because I think all men are bad, but you just have to be aware. I would like to think that in a place like Arsenal, there would be men who would step in if they saw it happen, and I think we can talk about this in a bit, Tom, about what the possible solution is. Ultimately, there are unfortunately always going to be people who operate outside of the law, think they are above the rules, and it really it shouldn't be up to us to alter our behaviour to avoid that. We have to come of it in a different way. But no, I will be proudly going to the Emirates and feeling as safe as I can. But it certainly was a bit of a that is a bit of a shocker from someone at Arsenal, and I don't know what the club are doing, but ultimately, it's a really unfortunate incident.
Yeah, I think the person that was targeted has tweeted the club, so I assume I'm very, very surprised if they weren't aware, at the very least, of what's gone on, and hopefully something can happen. Yeah, I think you actually exposed a little of my ignorance in that answer as well, because you're right to say that wherever a woman is, there's got to be a level of awareness that a man does not have to.
Yeah, and like Tom, it's not necessarily ignorance from your part. You're a man, and you don't experience that, so you can't expect you to constantly feel the same as us. And I think you're more than aware that at night it's probably a little bit scarier for me walking down the road from you. It's not ignorance, it's just different perspectives, basically.
Sure. Yeah, look, I've being married, I hear stories from my wife about things and how she feels walking home from a station. And I endeavor as much as I can, whenever I can, provide a lift, or that it's always a priority for me in that case, because I am aware. And so no, I know you're trying to protect me there with the answer there a little bit, but no, there was, I think, genuine some ignorance in saying that in some ways, because it does exist. But I appreciate it all the same. Sophie, I obviously want to give you an opportunity to give your thoughts on the incident that we're talking about as well, and anything further on from what Laura said, and any incidents yourself that might relate, because I know that you've obviously dealt with some pretty horrible stuff online as well.
Yeah, I think regarding that thing on Twitter, and obviously we won't really say who that person is because we probably want to respect their privacy as well. But I think, when I did see it, I think someone sent me it today on like a group chat, and I just looked at it and I just couldn't, even though you do see things like this happen, I couldn't believe it, because even the person that, tweeted it, he thought himself it was a bit pervy. And like, if you thought that, why were you tweeting it anyway? Like, it's it's just like, it's so bad. I do hope the person is okay, because I know next time they go to a game, they might think, will this happen again? And they might, feel like they have to watch themselves all the time. And I think it's obviously important that people are comfortable going to games on their own. And I hope that person can still go to games and enjoy themselves, because Arsenal is such a loving, supporting community. I know at games as well, I've always felt safe. I've only been to quite a few, and I've always had my family with me, but I've always felt like part of an Arsenal family there. You just feel really comfortable. So I do think Arsenal will probably do something about it, and I think they should, because it's just not acceptable, is it? Especially in this day and age. And we do obviously see things like that. I know online it's different, because I remember like when I went to my first Arsenal game, obviously I had a bit of, people sending horrible messages. You go to games thinking, will this happen? And you know what? It's completely different when you go to games. I feel so happy, like you forget about life. You're just enjoying the game for the 90 minutes. So I think when you're online, you feel like it could be like that at a game, because like you said, Tom, I have obviously had, some horrible messages. And I think sometimes it's good to call them out, because people always say to me, why don't you ignore it? And I think if they were saying this to me in the street or in life, I wouldn't accept it. I would say to them, like, what do you think you're doing? Like, being so horrible. Like, I would say something to them. But I do think as well, I get why people might ignore it, because it isn't nice to read and you shouldn't really spend time thinking about it. So I think with the online stuff, it is a difficult one, really, because it can affect you. I will be honest, when I first kind of came on here, social media, and I did get it, it was difficult, because I had it. The same person would constantly send me these messages. Like, it was harassment, really, looking back. But it is hard to deal with that, not just women, but men as well. Anyone experience abuse, but it is tough. But I think it's just really good to have these kind of conversations, really, with the people that are watching this as well. It'll help them understand even more.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's actually. I think I've seen some comments from people in the chat box at the start of the episode, just kind of like, in a way, putting it as a little bit of a joke, and then have actually realised the seriousness of the conversation and been like, actually, no, this is really important, and we need to talk about it, which is great. No, thanks for that, Sophie. I guess the next part of the conversation is kind of the why. In some ways, like why. I know we've made reference a little bit to some of the changes online, and we've made reference to individuals like Joey Barton. I agree with you, Laura. I don't like even using his name to give him, because that's ultimately what he wants is some reaction. But the question I have sometimes is what are some men scared of, about, in terms of what are men scared about another person, in this case a woman, having an opinion on football, or even being involved in the sport. To give you an example, I remember when I talk every morning on the 8 a.m. show and I bring up the women's team, it is because my main expertise is on the men's side and talking about the men's game, and that is where I engage. That's what my job's involved with, as well as the men's side of things. So usually if there's a result, if there's a transfer, we talk about it. It's usually at the head of the running order of the morning show. And someone left a comment about saying, why do you not give any attention to the Arsenal wheelchair team as well? Now, I scoured the internet to find if Arsenal have a wheelchair team, and they don't. It turns out, unless I've really struggled with my Googling abilities. And it's like this idea that, like, what if this idea of trying to level that, like, as if it's an attempt to level the playing field in some senses, when it's really not. It's an attempt to bring more attention to it. But it's this idea that trying to make an effort, trying to put the effort into bringing more attention to it, to big it up, to in some ways, give people more access to it, is in some ways a bad thing. And where do you think that stems from?
I think there is this sort of universally held belief that there is a kind of finite attention span, and that by bringing the women's game up, you are inherently bringing the men's game down, so that the two can't exist in a kind of, in the same world, that every time the women's game gains something, the men's game loses something, loses attention, loses money. That's obviously not true, not least because although the women's game has come a long way, it is still miles behind the men's game in terms of attendances. Like, if you really feel that threatened by it, all you need to do is go and look at the figures. Your precious men's game is safe, all right? And there are other things that are threatening global football such as, you know, the poor kind of standards about climate change, Man City flying everywhere, refereeing standards, corruption, you know, the interference of states in clubs. That's actually what threatens the game, not the growth of the women's game. And I think to your question about why, Tom, it's a really interesting one, because for so long, you know, football has been a man's space for men to operate in. And I think with the rise of, you know, feminism and women being in more spaces where they previously weren't, although I don't agree with it, I can just about understand why men feel like they are losing any spaces that are just for them. And that's why they're gravitating towards the Joey Bartons, Andrew Tate, anyone who has this kind of extreme view of feminism, because they feel attacked. They feel like everything they do is wrong. All men are terrible. You know, women should be getting the advantage in everything. They should be getting the jobs. You know, we should be basically, you know, positively discriminating to the extent that, you know, the sort of average man feels like I am now at the bottom of the pecking order. I'm not allowed to go to the football because there's loads of women there. I'm not allowed to say this and that and the other. And as I said, I don't agree, but I am trying to at least understand as a woman why Joey Barton is, you know, has so many people who agree with him, and at least trying to understand might get us somewhere. But I think it is an overestimation of what growing the women's game actually means for the men's game. In my humble opinion, both can exist perfectly happily together. The women's game could be as big as the men's game, and that will not take away from the men's game. There is more than enough resource. There are finite resources. I know lots of men's clubs, you know, bankroll the women's teams. They help with finances, but there's this sort of inherent view that if the women's team get attention, marketing spend, money spent on them, in some way that's going to stop my team from signing Mbappe. And it's just, I genuinely think that is the kind of consensus that
which is mad,
which is mad, which is absolutely insane. But I can understand why, if you believe that and, you know, you've convinced yourself of that, then of course you'd be attacking women in the sport, the women's game, because it is encroaching on something that you love and identify with. Just the reality is that's not actually the case. And I think the two can coexist perfectly happily. And the final thing I'll say is the thing about women's football, which makes me laugh so much, is that there is no other sport in the world which people are so proudly declaring that they hate. You know, I'm not a big rugby fan. Okay, you know, Six Nations is on. I just don't watch it. It doesn't bother me. I don't sit there fuming and spitting at my TV screen. I just don't watch it. And there's a lot of kind of like very proud, oh, I don't watch women's football, etc. And you're like, okay, there's loads of things in life I don't like. I don't announce it to the world. And that really, there's one common denominator here, and that is because it's women playing a man's game.
No, it's an excellent point, and it's something that I absolutely see in my comment sections and chat boxes. Yeah, we have a zero tolerance, so they don't last very long in the chat boxes or the comment section. They get blocked very quickly. But it's so strange, like the desire to say that they have a problem with it. I think I was looking back through some of the comments that have still survived on the channel, and there was one this morning, because I talked about Jonas Eidevall being under a bit of pressure because obviously going out the FA Cup this weekend was a really big blow, and I think rightfully he is under some pressure because there is an expectation on the women's side, I think, that actually outgrows the men's team because of where they've been competitively in the WSL and especially in Europe, which they sadly don't have this season because of, again, another failure, you'd argue, in the qualification process. But in reaction to them going out, someone left a comment saying, thank God they're out, so we don't need to talk about them anymore. And it's like, I replied saying, I'm assuming you're talking about the women's team, and then in brackets or the question mark, if you're brave enough to respond to this, you'll be happy to know that they didn't respond.
No, there is never
shocker. There's no bravery there, you know. But it's that desire, Sophie, that Laura brought up brilliantly about why is there such a desire for some men to try and put it down, to highlight something they hate so much, when there's so many other things that we just don't, like, I never say to people that you have to watch the women's game. I never say to someone you have to like it, and if you don't care about it, that's fine. You're entitled to do that. But when the line gets crossed, when you start putting effort into letting people know that you don't care for it or don't like it. But yeah, give me your thoughts on that, Fred.
Yeah, like I've always said, like if it's not for you, that's fair enough. Like it's each people might like it, some people don't like it, and I know it has grown a lot recently, especially since winning the Euros. It has, a lot of people have sort of changed their mind on it, and I think it's obviously, like, I personally like it and I enjoy watching it. I've seen it grow in the last few years, but it's a difficult one, because if you watch like YouTube highlights of like the Arsenal women or women's football, you'll get comments, and I'm just thinking, like, you've spent time out of your day to say that, like, why couldn't you just ignore it? And I do think some of it can be jealousy, because like Laura was saying, because it's come so far, you might worry in case it will overtake, men's football, and it does get compared a lot to women and men's football, and I do think, like, they're both different. Obviously the rules apply to both of the teams. It's the same football match, but it's just different, because I do say, men are stronger than women play differently. It's the same game, but it's just played a bit differently, and I do think it has improved a lot in recent years, and women's football is getting the right funding now, and we are starting to see Arsenal women, for example, play at the Emirates with like 40,000 fans, so we are seeing that more support. But I think a lot of it might be jealousy, because we've seen it come so far, and maybe some people might get irritated by it doing so well, because I know a lot of people, friends of mine, that don't like it, and they're obviously quite understanding, like they won't ever say anything rude, but there are a lot of trolls online that says no one cares about football, but women's football. But I do feel like a lot of people do. But it's a difficult one with social media, especially because there are a lot of comments, and like you said on your channel, Tom, it's weird. Like, you kind of think, why don't you just not say anything, because you're clearly drawing attention to yourself. But yeah, I think like Laura said, I think maybe they're just a bit threatened that it might come to level of the men's football, or come a bit better than that. I just think they're both doing different types of football, but I do think it's, women's football isn't for everyone. Like I said, I think it's a personal thing. People might like it, because I know with like the women's football community at games, you do see a lot of female players kind of come out with their sexuality. It's more of a accepting community, I would say. So I know a lot of
Yeah.
fans, love women's football for that, because it would be a lot harder, for a male player to kind of come out, and the community isn't like that. It's sort of a lot more supporting in women's football, which is obviously like a safe place for a lot of people to go to. But yeah, I just think a lot of it will be down to jealousy, but I do hope in time it will kind of stop, because it's not really nice to, these players might read this online, and it's not really good for them to see it.
Yeah, I know for a fact that players do. From working in the men's game and around the Arsenal men's team, they're on their phones constantly. So that, yes, I can be assured that it will cross over. And I suppose that segues nicely onto the next part, which is trying to find the solution, what the solutions are. And in all honesty, and I say this begrudgingly, I don't think there is a perfect solution. I don't think this is a problem that will ever be, unless there is, it becomes so enforceable that on social media you can be held to account for things that are posted, or that there are things listening to you, the things that you say, even in closed circles. It's never going to be, completely eradicated. However, I certainly think that there is more that can be done to help mitigate it as an issue. So for you, Laura, where do you kind of see, maybe I think the way of phrasing the question best is, where do you think there's not being enough done that can be done more to try and help prevent, or at the least minimize the impacts of it?
So one thing that I always think about when it comes to this is the importance of role models and people who are well respected in the game by this kind of majority. They have a huge amount of influence, and I hate saying, oh, we didn't hear anything from this person on this, but one thing that I think would really have helped during the kind of Joey Barton attacking the sort of female pundits thing was more male pundits coming out and saying that, you know, they support female pundits, they know what they're talking about, because ultimately those are the people. It's quite hard if you're a troll online having a pop at a female pundit, and then your hero Gary Neville comes out and says, and I know he did have a bit of a go at Joe Barton, but the most influential people at the moment in the game are men, and the louder they use their voices to call out people and give their support to uplifting women, that's where it sort of so it's a kind of top-down approach. But at the same time, one thing that does kind of give me a sense for optimism is if you actually look on the sort of incident that we were talking about today, the majority of the comments are from men saying, mate, this isn't it, like this is wrong. And all I can kind of hope is that continues, that kind of, it doesn't have to be a massive formal complaint. It can be just a comment to someone, even if it's someone you know and love, just to check them, because ultimately I think the people that are most influential in our lives are the people that we respect. And if one of your friends comes to you and says what you just said, whether it was a joke or not, was actually not okay, that is so much more powerful than any campaign, any kind of like advertising that can be done. So and it goes the same with, you know, women and how we talk about people. It's keeping your friends kind of in check, because ultimately you know, they love you, they want you to be happy, but it's also up to you to kind of be honest with each other. So, you know, when it comes to Twitter, it's calling it out when you see it, and it doesn't need to be angry or abusive. It can be, this comment is not okay. And if I'm a woman and I'm seeing that makes me feel like I've got support and that I've got people who are there for me. The one thing that Sophie just said as well that I think is one of the reasons why this is so important is, Sophie obviously said that she played football growing up, and football was never an option for me. So I'm considerably older than you, Sophie. But when I grew up, we weren't offered it. It was the boys played football and we played netball. And when I learned to play netball, I had never seen a game of netball. So I'm learning this sport. I don't know what it looks like. I've never seen a professional game. It fills me with immense joy. Like, I actually get quite emotional thinking about it, that girls can play football and can play sport while watching professional athletes doing it. And that's why the bigger the women's game gets, I think about all the players that learn best when they learn watching a professional. So the bigger it is immensely important for women to have those types of role models. Like it really is transformative if they can look up to someone who they look like, play like, can aspire to be. And so every time I see these comments about the women not being good as good as the men, I'm like, that is irrelevant. You know, we're not idiots. I know that the fastest women's player is not going to run as fast as the man. They can't kick the ball as hard. That is literally biology. You don't get that in other sports. We don't constantly talk about how Serena Williams can't hit a serve as fast as Djokovic can, because it doesn't matter. They don't play against each other. It's the same sport. So my wish is that, number one, we keep each other in check, and that can be, you know, pretty casual, but also I want to hear more from the kind of the powerful voices in the game, and I don't think they're doing enough at the moment. I'm pretty sure most owners of football clubs, with the exception of Arsenal, actually, our chief commercial officer is obviously a woman. It's Juliet Slot, and she has put a lot into the women's team, but there's not enough voices about this in the media, and I don't think it should be left to the female pundits, Laura Woods, to defend themselves. They should be being defended by their peers and people with huge influence in this game, because that is the loudest voice.
Yeah, for sure. I think it crosses over, doesn't it? It's not just about kind of the male, female, the sexism side of things. I've talked about it in the racism discussion, and that's why I always talk about it as a white guy. You know, talking about racism as a problem, as someone who's never ever going to experience that myself as being a problem in my life, is going to bring more attention to it. And so that's really key. The point you made about kind of like telling your mates when they've crossed the line, you know, I've done that myself, and it sucks. It's not nice.
Yeah, it's incredibly hard to do, because it's so much easier to just sort of laugh it off, but ultimately that has a domino effect. Each time you don't do anything, it condones the idea that that's acceptable, and sort of the absence of a no, people take as a yes, so they just crack on, and that's how you go from being someone who is just a bit of a joker to the type of person that sits behind a computer and sends abuse all day.
Yeah, and it's really hard. You know, I'm not perfect. I've certainly sat by and watched my friends make comments that I don't agree with and sat silently because I felt too awkward to say something, or you don't want to be that that
Yeah, you
person
don't want to
that's
cause a problem. Yeah, you don't want to.
you don't
Oh,
want to
you're
be a
being a
killjoy,
snowflake.
that
Yeah,
sort of thing.
yeah,
But and the time I did it, it didn't go well.
yeah.
It didn't go well, and it took some real like conversations, and then beyond just group chats, some one-on-one
Mm.
conversations to kind of smooth things out and kind of explain why it's unacceptable. And maybe sometimes to help them see why what they've said is wrong as well. So yeah, definitely important. Sophie, solutions? Have you got any different on top of what Laura said?
Yeah, I think Laura makes some good points, especially with the Joey Barton stuff. I think it's good to see if there was more male, not just footballers but pundits, in sports, just to kind of stick up for us a little bit, and for the women that obviously were targeted through that time. But I think with the social media side, I think especially in the last few years, I do think it's gone out of control. Like not just sexism, racism and all of that. We do see that a lot, and it's hard because if someone makes an account and they say this stuff, they can just make another one and say it again, and it can really affect people. I think in this industry, you do learn to have a thicker skin with it. I mean, you shouldn't really have to accept it at all because it's not okay. And like I said, it's good to kind of think it's good to publicly, tell them that it's not okay to say that. But I think with social media, I think that's a big problem that does need sorting. I know, a few years ago there was something about you had to have ID to kind of use Twitter, and maybe it could be a good thing because a lot of people probably say stuff because they know they can get away with it. So I think with the social media side, I think that's the big problem with that, because I think if people know they can say it, then they will say it, which is kind of sad to think about. And like Laura mentioned before, it's always the ones that have, not their profile picture. It's always like a football profile picture, and it makes it even more annoying because you can't find them online. But I think in life with football, I think it's just nice for kind of people to make you feel welcome, make you feel part of, being able to, like I mentioned before about playing football. I think if someone said when I was younger, do you want to play? I would have probably felt more comfortable, because it's kind of hard to put yourself out there and ask if you can play football because, like Laura said, football wasn't really what she used to play. It was like netball, and it was hard to kind of do that. So I do think we've got a long way to go, but I think it can be hard really when someone, might be sexist, and you have to kind of stick up for like you've got to tell them what they're saying isn't okay. Like Tom said, it's tough because you don't want to upset anyone. You don't want to be in that position where you're kind of telling them off for saying that. It's a bit of an awkward one, I think. I mean, like you, Tom, it's took me time to do that, to be assertive and tell people what they're saying isn't wrong, because someone I know said something on the chat and I knew it was wrong the other week, and I thought, you know what, I know I need to say something, but I didn't want it to cause an argument, and I don't ever want that. So it is really tough to be able to speak up about what you think's right, because you don't really want confrontation or arguments. But I think I would say if there's an opportunity where you can kind of stick up for a woman in football where you're seeing sexism, I think you've got to really do that, because if you were in their position, having someone that's supporting you and sticking by you would really help you. So I think that's the important thing. But I know with social media, it is a difficult one. It feels like nothing will get solved because we do see it happening more and more with, not just sexism, like I've said, with different types of abuse online.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that the point raised again that we had that theme of speaking up and saying something, the social media side as well. Can there be tougher things? The ID one is really interesting because it's something I've certainly leaned on in the past and had a big conversation. I thought this is the obvious solution that everyone online should have to identify. And you say it sometimes, I think, quite naively and easily to say that, because then people do raise some fair arguments about identity theft and cybercrime and things like that. If your ID is associated with an account, how easy that can be to steal and manipulate. And sadly, that is a problem. But I think that it is it's the core part of one of the big strategies that will help, is making it easier to identify people that commit these acts. So I think that the base is there, the foundation is there with that idea for sure. It's just about how do we make it as safe as possible to implement at the same time. And I was wondering if we'd get any comments in the chat box that kind of came up in resistance, I think is what the best way to put it. And Enchanted Edition put a comment saying freedom of speech though, question mark. And what I love about the words freedom of speech is that I often use this on the show, and I say this a lot, and I can't take credit for it because it comes from James O'Brien on LBC, who uses this phrase a lot, where he says freedom of speech, yes, but freedom from scrutiny is the issue here. Is that freedom of speech is fine, and you can say, there's no one putting a muzzle on you. You can say what you like about anything, but that doesn't mean that you won't be scrutinized for the words and the things that you say. And I think that is absolutely where it needs to stem from. Go on, Laura. Do you want to jump in?
No, I think what James says is the perfect articulation of it, and it perfectly demonstrates how this phrase has been twisted and misunderstood by people who think they should be able to say whatever they want without consequence. That's not what free speech is. It's it is freedom from intervention by government, law. It's not freedom to run your mouth and then use it but it's freedom of speech. I can say what I want. That's not it. I'd also say that if freedom of speech doesn't apply to racism and discriminatory things, that is a separate issue. So I also think that if you are having to use freedom of speech as the justification for what you're saying, you need to check yourself. If you're like, probably shouldn't say this, there's loads of reasons I shouldn't, but hang on, I do have that one argument that it's freedom of speech. I think you really need to have a look at yourself. If that's the only excuse you can give, we're sort of beyond the pale there, to be honest.
Sophie, I'll let you speak on that as well. Any thoughts on the freedom of speech?
Yeah, just to echo what you guys are saying. I think, like you said, I think it's okay not to like something, or if you don't like someone, I just think sometimes if it's not nice to say, and if someone said that to you, it would hurt you, it's best not to say it. But even if people do say it, you should be challenged, because it sort of depends what we're saying. But if we're talking about, for example, women's football, and we're saying I don't like it, that's one thing. But if you're attacking someone, then that's completely something else, and that's abuse, and that isn't okay. So I think it's not really acceptable, and it depends what you're really saying, because like I've said, if it's more of like an opinion, I think it's okay. But if it's more abuse, then like Tom just said, it definitely needs to be challenged, and you should have consequences for your words, because it's not really fair for people to have to go through abuse, really.
For sure. Laura, you unmuted. Did you want to jump in?
No, I was just going to say, I think one thing when we have these conversations, and I appreciate you giving us the kind of platform to talk about this, is I think if you're a man in these conversations, you often feel like you're being attacked and that you can't do anything right. That is not really the intention. I think Sophie and I are not here to say that every man is terrible and life is terrible because men are horrible to us. That's really not what the point is. It's more that there are actually very small things that you can do that would really make an exponential difference to our experience online, even if that is just popping a message of support if you see us being attacked, anything like that. Small things. The majority of women don't hate all men, and I think often these arguments sort of boil down to men can't do anything right and we hate all men, but it really isn't that. It's our presence in these spaces. We just want to join in. I'm not trying to steal any kind of space in football. There is enough space for everyone's voices. Just want to be a part of it, and I don't want to take anything away from you, but there are small things that you can do to make this experience for us considerably less unpleasant, unpredictable, and I just I hope that's understood.
Yeah, no, I think it was, and if it wasn't, I think our DMs are open, right? We can if people are confused.
Come at me.
Happy to explain it for sure. Thank you, ladies, for joining me this evening. I really appreciate your time. I think it was a really honest and open conversation about this as well. Sophie, where can people find you, and what you're going to be up to?
Thank you so much for having me on, first of all. And I think it was such an important chat, especially, you know, for us to understand each other a lot more and everyone that's watching this. So thank you for having me on. It's been really good to kind of have these chats as well. But yeah, to those that might want to find me, I'm on Twitter, TV_Gooner, and I have a YouTube channel, Gooner Gossip TV, where I just really talk a bit about Arsenal. And I do also do shows on the women's team as well. I do like to kind of do a bit of both for those that like that sort of stuff. So yeah, that's what I do really.
Absolutely. And yeah, I've joined Sophie on her channel. She's fantastic at what she does. So make sure you go and check it out. And yeah, I'll make sure to leave a link to it. If you DM me that after the show, Sophie, I'll make sure that goes into the description of today's show. Laura as well, thank you for joining me. And yeah, tell people where they can find you and what you're going to be up to.
You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Laura Kirk12. I've also been on Sophie's channel. She is a brilliant interviewer as well, has a really brilliant kind of technique. So make sure you go and check out some of her videos. Me, I just tweet 100% nonsense. So if you want to come and join my unfiltered nonsense, come on down. We don't take things too seriously.
Lovely stuff. Yeah, it's nice to go in that direction after what was a relatively serious 50 minutes. But yeah, it's tweeting about nonsense is yeah, it's a skill, if anything, you know. So make sure you drop Laura and Sophie a follow on the socials, and as Sophie said, check out her channel as well, which I'll leave a link to in today's video description. We will continue to cover the women's game, and you will continue to cover these. I don't want to use difficult as a word, just kind of, I think, thought-provoking is probably the better word, topics to discuss. And if you've been affected by anything that we've talked about today, my DMs are certainly open. I'm sure the girls will be open to having a conversation if you want to send them a tweet as well about anything that you'd like to ask them. So, and there are of course plenty of outlets out there that you can get help to if you're facing any of the issues that we've talked about. I always recommend blocking as kind of the first thing. I know it's not the perfect solution, but engaging with it sometimes can make it worse. But there's always the option to try and remove that aspect from what you can control on social media. So please do seek out that help if you need it. I'll be back tomorrow morning, of course, as always, at 8 a.m. To round up all the latest Arsenal news from what has been another riveting 24 hours of Arsenal outside of a transfer window. It's challenging. It's coming up with the news when it's not near a game day. That March period, if we don't play against Chelsea, nearly 3 weeks without Arsenal is going to be, that's going to be tough. But we'll endeavour to carry on every day, 8 a.m. So do join us. Make sure you drop a like on the video and subscribe as well if you are new. We'll see you again soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.